The contractor found it behind the drywall. That's the sentence I've been trying to figure out how to say out loud for almost a year now. I've started the story a dozen times in my head. In the shower, on my drive to the hospital, at 3 in the morning when sleep won't come, and I always get stuck right there. Because everything before that sentence was one life, and everything after it was another. I'm a traveling nurse. ER. I've been doing it since I was 26, rotating through contracts in different states. Sometimes 6 months somewhere, sometimes a year. I was 29 when I signed a contract in Boise, Idaho. That was where I met my husband. His name was Caleb. He was 34, a structural engineer, careful and methodical in the way that people who work with load-bearing things tend to be. He had this habit of touching door frames when he walked through them, not nervously, just automatically, the way someone who thinks about structures all day would. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was the most specific, quietly fascinating thing about a person I had ever seen. We dated for 14 months. He proposed at a state park outside of Boise. Just the two of us, and a thermos of coffee and the kind of cold November morning that makes everything feel serious and real. I said yes before he even finished asking. We got married the following October. Small ceremony. 31 people. His parents flew in from Michigan. My mother drove up from Sacramento with my aunt. My best friend from nursing school, Tamsin, was my maid of honor. We rented a barn outside of town that had string lights and wooden floors and smelled like cedar and autumn, and I remember standing in the doorway before I walked down the aisle, looking at all those people who loved us and thinking, I did it. I actually built something steady. The photographer's name was Roy Haverford. He was 62 years old. Retired Army, had done 2 tours in Afghanistan before he came home and picked up a camera. He shot weddings on weekends and didn't charge nearly enough for how good he was. Caleb had found him through a coworker. Roy shook my hand at our first meeting with both of his, that firm double handshake that veterans sometimes do, and said, I'm going to take care of you. I believed him immediately. The wedding was on a Saturday. Roy was there from noon until almost midnight. He was unobtrusive in that practiced way of his, moving around the edges of things without disrupting them, capturing moments I didn't even know were happening. At one point, I caught him crouching near the floor to photograph my flower girl, my cousin's daughter, Wren, who was 4, looking up at the string lights with her mouth open. I made a mental note to ask for that photo specifically. 3 weeks after the wedding, Roy called me. I was at work, mid-shift, and I missed it. He left a voicemail. I listened to it in the break room, still in my scrubs. This is Roy Haverford. I've got your photos ready, all edited and organized, but there's something else I came across while I was working through the files. I'd like to show it to you in person before I send anything. No rush, I know you're busy, but please don't bring your husband to this meeting. I listened to that voicemail 4 times, the last sentence especially. Please don't bring your husband to this meeting. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a surprise? Maybe he wanted to show me a special photo book he put together. Maybe there was some contractual thing he needed one signatory for. I told myself 11 different explanations on the drive to his studio, and I believed none of them. Roy's studio was in a converted warehouse space on the east side of town. Photography equipment everywhere, framed prints on the exposed brick walls, the kind of space that feels lived in and serious at the same time. He made me coffee without asking and set it in front of me, and then sat down across from me with his hands folded on the table. I'm going to show you something, he said, and I want you to know that I spent 3 weeks trying to decide if it was my place. I talked to my wife about it. I talked to my pastor about it. I prayed about it. He looked at me steadily. I keep coming back to the same answer. If you were my daughter, I would want someone to show you. I put my coffee down. I need you to tell me what this is before you show me, I said. He nodded. When I shoot a wedding, I shoot everything. Guests, details, candids, things people don't notice me getting. Sometimes I don't even look at everything right away. I do a first pass for the formal shots, send those to clients within a week, then I go back through and do the full edit. He paused. In the full edit, I found photographs of your husband with a woman at the reception, not photographs that were not anything obvious, but the way they were interacting, the way he looked at her, the way she touched his arm. He stopped. I did some digging. I'm sorry. I know that might feel intrusive, but I needed to know what I was actually looking at before I brought it to you. The room was very quiet, and what were you looking at? I said. He slid a manila envelope across the table. I opened it slowly. Inside were printed photographs, 8 of them, and a single sheet of paper. The photographs were from our reception. In them, my husband was standing near the back corner of the barn with a woman I recognized as a colleague of his, someone I'd met briefly at a work party the year before. In the photos, they weren't doing anything that a stranger would necessarily flag, but I knew my husband's face. I had studied it across breakfast tables and hospital waiting rooms and 12-hour drives. I knew exactly what his face looked like when he was just being polite. This was not that face. The sheet of paper was a printout. Roy had found her social media profile. She had an account that was mostly public, and on it, going back 14 months, were photographs. Hiking trips, restaurant dinners, a weekend in Coeur d'Alene. She never named him. He was never in any of the pictures directly, but in one of them, taken at what looked like a trailhead somewhere, there was a shadow on the ground. 2 people, one with the unmistakable rectangular outline of a hard hat clipped to a belt loop. Caleb always clipped his hard hat to his belt loop when he hiked. I had teased him about it 100 times. I sat with those photographs for a long time. Roy didn't say anything. He just let me sit. Finally, I said, "How long do you think?" "Based on the dates on those posts," he said carefully, "at least a year before your wedding, possibly longer." I did the math quickly and without wanting to. We had been dating for 14 months before we got married, which meant that whatever this was, it had started before I ever said yes. I drove home in the kind of automatic way where you arrive somewhere and don't fully remember the route. I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, then I went inside and made dinner like nothing had happened, because Caleb was already home and I needed time that I didn't have yet. That night I lay next to him in the dark and counted ceiling tiles until 3 in the morning. I want to say I confronted him immediately, that I was brave and direct and clear. I wasn't. I spent 9 days collecting myself, 9 days going to work and coming home and cooking dinner and asking about his day and giving him every opportunity to say something, anything that would suggest I had misunderstood what I was looking at. He didn't say anything. He was exactly the same as he always was. That, somehow, was the worst part. On the 10th day, I called my mother. My mother is 61 years old. She worked as a postal carrier for 30 years. She has small hands and a loud laugh and an absolute zero tolerance for nonsense that she developed. She always says, sometime around 1987, and has never reconsidered. I drove to a park near our house and sat on a bench and called her and told her everything. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "Baby, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You did not do anything wrong. You loved somebody with everything you had, and that is never the wrong thing to do. What happens next is not a punishment. It is just what comes after." She paused. "What do you need right now?" "I don't know," I said. "Yes, you do," she said. "You just don't want to say it yet." She was right. I knew exactly what I needed. I needed to leave. I just hadn't let myself say it out loud yet because saying it out loud made it real. And real meant the barn and the string lights and Roy's double handshake and 31 people and my cousin's daughter looking up at the lights with her mouth open. All of it meant something different than I had thought. I called a lawyer 2 days later. I called her from my car in a hospital parking garage between shifts, still in my scrubs, and she was professional and calm and told me what I needed to do. I did it. I didn't tell Caleb until everything was in order. Not to be cruel, but because I had spent 9 years working emergency medicine, and one of the first things you learn in the ER is that you do not move a patient before you know where you're moving them to. When I told him, we were sitting in the kitchen. I set the manila envelope on the table between us. He didn't open it right away. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. "How long have you known?" he said. That was the moment, I think, that I understood the full shape of what had happened. Not the question of whether he had done it, not even the question of how long, but the fact that his first response was not denial, not confusion. His first response was a logistics question. "Long enough," I said. He opened the envelope. He looked at the photographs for a few seconds. Then he set them back down. "I'm sorry," he said. I had imagined this conversation many times in the preceding weeks. I had written out different versions of it in the Notes app on my phone at 2 a.m, arguments I wanted to make, things I needed him to understand. I had planned to say a lot of things, but sitting there across from him, watching him look at those photographs with the same calm, methodical expression he used when he was assessing a structure, I didn't say any of them. "I know," I said, and I got up and went to the bedroom and started to pack. The divorce took 7 months. It was not dramatic, it was just slow and expensive and sad in the specific way that dismantling something built carefully is always sad. During those 7 months, several things happened that I did not expect. The first was Roy. I had called him the day after I confronted Caleb just to tell him what had happened. He listened quietly. When I finished, he said, "You're going to be all right. I've seen people come through much harder things than this." Then he paused and said, "My wife wants to know if you like soup." I laughed for the first time in 3 weeks. It surprised me so much I had to sit down. That weekend, Roy and his wife, a small, energetic woman named Loretta, who taught middle school science, had me over for dinner. They fed me beef stew and cornbread and didn't ask me to talk about anything I didn't want to talk about. Loretta showed me pictures of their grandchildren. Roy complained affectionately about the local youth soccer league, of which he was apparently a long-time referee. It was the most normal evening I had had in months, and I drove home from it feeling something I hadn't felt since opening that envelope. Not okay. Not healed. Just held. The second unexpected thing was my coworkers. I hadn't told anyone at the hospital except Tamsin. But hospitals are small ecosystems, and people notice things, and at some point my charge nurse, a woman named Georgette who had been running our ER for 19 years and had seen everything twice, appeared beside me during a slow hour and said, without preamble, "You need anything, you tell me. I'll adjust your schedule, I'll cover for you, I'll listen, whatever, you don't have to explain." I started to say I was fine. She gave me the look that people with 19 years in emergency medicine develop. The look that means I am not asking what you're performing, I'm asking what you actually need. And I stopped. "I might need some shorter shifts for a while," I said. "Done," she said, and walked away. The third thing was the smallest and the most unexpected. About 4 months in, I was back at Roy's studio picking up the final hard drive of edited photos. I had decided I still wanted them, most of them, the ones of my family and my friends, and Ren looking up at the lights. Roy walked me out to my car, and we stood in the parking lot for a minute in the way you do when you're not quite ready to say goodbye. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Sure. Why did you do it? You didn't have to. You could have just sent me the photos. It wasn't your responsibility." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I spent 20 years in the army. You know what that does to you? It makes you very clear about what loyalty looks like. I don't know how to see something and look away from it. I never learned how to do that. I don't think I want to." He shook my hand with both of his, that same double handshake from our first meeting. "You're going to build something real," he said, "sturdier than the last one." I cried in my car for about 10 minutes after that. The good kind of crying, the kind that clears something out. My divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in April. I was at work. Tamsin texted me during my lunch break. She had been tracking the court dates more carefully than I had, and I read her message in a supply closet off the main corridor and sat with it for a few minutes. Outside, I could hear monitors and voices and the particular frequency of organized urgency that I have been working inside for 6 years. I thought about the barn and the string lights. I thought about my mother saying you loved somebody with everything you had, and that is never the wrong thing to do. I thought about Roy touching that door frame of his studio on my way out the last time. Automatic, the way someone does who has spent a lifetime thinking about what holds. I went back out to my patients. That summer, my contract in Boise ended. I signed a new one in Missoula, Montana, a hospital right at the edge of the mountains. The kind of place where the ER sees everything from ski accidents to altitude emergencies to the ordinary disasters of human life. I found an apartment with a view of the Clark Fork River. I bought a used kayak. I called my mother every Sunday. A few months after I moved, I went back to Boise for a weekend. No particular reason. I just wanted to see it without the weight of everything that had happened in it. I drove past the street where Caleb and I had lived, and I drove out to the state park where he proposed, and I sat on the same bench with the same kind of cold November air and a thermos of coffee, and I let myself feel the full, specific sadness of it without flinching away from it. Then I drove to Roy and Loretta's house for dinner. Loretta made soup. Roy complained about the soccer league. Their youngest granddaughter, who was 6 now, fell asleep on the couch between us watching a nature documentary about rivers. I drove back to my hotel through the dark Idaho streets, and I thought about sturdiness, about what it means to build something that holds, about how sometimes the person who tells you the truth is a 62-year-old retired Army photographer who touches door frames and prays about his decisions and still believes, after everything he's seen, that showing up for people is a thing worth doing. I don't know who I'm going to be in 5 years. I don't know what I'm building yet, but I know what I'm building it out of the things that held. My mother's voice in a park. Georgette's look across an ER corridor. Roy's double handshake in a parking lot. That's enough to start with. That's more than enough. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened, not in a dramatic way. Just quietly, the way you do when you're driving somewhere alone and the radio's off and your brain finally has room to work through things. Here's what I keep coming back to. Nothing about what Caleb did was random. It didn't fall out of the sky. It was built, slowly, over time, out of small choices he made every single day. Choices to deceive, to perform normalcy while something else was running underneath, to look me in the eye across a dinner table and decide, again, that today was not the day he was going to be honest. That's not fate. That's not bad luck. That's a pattern of decisions, and eventually patterns become structures, and structures either hold or they collapse. His collapsed the moment Roy sat across from me with that envelope, and here's the part I wasn't expecting, my response to it. The 9 days I took before I said anything, the lawyer I called from a parking garage, the way I packed deliberately rather than in anger. That was also a pattern, built out of 6 years of emergency medicine, 6 years of learning that panic costs you, that clarity is something you choose, that the most important thing you can do in a crisis is figure out where you're moving the patient before you move them. I didn't know I was building that skill for this, but I was. That's what I mean when I think about cause and effect. We are always building something. The question is whether we're paying attention to what. Tamsin paid attention. She tracked court dates I couldn't bring myself to look at. Georgette paid attention. 19 years in that ER, and she could read what I was carrying before I said a word. Roy paid attention to photographs that most photographers would have scrolled past, and then he did the harder thing, which was decide what to do with what he saw. Every one of them made a choice, a small, specific, human choice to show up. And those choices are the reason I came out of this with anything intact. I think about that when I feel the pull toward bitterness, which still happens less than it used to. The temptation is to look at the marriage and see only the thing that broke. But that's not actually what the story is. The story is Roy and his double handshake. The story is my mother saying you love somebody with everything you had, and that is never the wrong thing to do. The story is Loretta's soup and a 6-year-old asleep on a couch between 2 people who kept showing up. I'm 31 now. I have an apartment in Missoula with a view of a river. I have a used kayak and a charge nurse who covered for me when I needed it, and a best friend who texted me the exact moment my divorce was finalized because she knew I needed someone to market. I don't know what I'm building next, but I know this. Character is just the sum of what you choose to do when it would be easier not to. Roy chose to tell the truth when silence would have been simpler. My mother chose encouragement when she could have chosen panic. I chose clarity when I could have chosen to fall apart. Those choices compound. They always compound. That's not a philosophy. That's just what I've watched happen in ERs and courtrooms and parking lots in Idaho over and over again. Build carefully. Build honestly. That's the whole thing, really. That's all I've got.